The original 6 this Saturday at 1:30. This week only.
Friday, April 16th. Tonight on the National. Royal visit. The Queen attends a gala celebration. The Falklands. Haig talks peace in Buenos Aires. Dramatic rescue. Police save a 5-year-old boy in Montreal. And on the Journal, Pierre Trudeau's long pursuit of patriation. A feature interview with the Prime Minister on Quebec, the West, and his personal future now that the Constitution is home. The National with Knowlton Nash.
Good evening. It was a morning of sightseeing, an afternoon of dining, and an evening of entertainment as the Queen continued her royal visit. She was joined today by Prince Philip as the tempo in Ottawa quickened toward tomorrow's proclamation of the Constitution. We have more on the Queen's Day from Brian Stewart.
This royal tour has now begun building up a special momentum. The Queen has been joined by Prince Philip, and by the time they emerged from a private church visit shortly after 12, enthusiasm was building, so were the crowds. And so, too, the sense of political import in this visit. Prime Minister Trudeau held a luncheon for Her Majesty at 24 Sussex. The only two premiers invited were Trudeau's constitutional allies from the beginning, Davis of Ontario, Hatfield of New Brunswick. And while there was quiet celebration at 24 Sussex, there was frantic last-minute rehearsal on Parliament Hill for tomorrow's constitutional ceremony. Everything had to be just right. And certain ministers were vigorously told where they'd stand. Anthems were rehearsed one more time.
Very good. And then the Queen signs on top here.
And stand-ins even ran through the signing of the Royal Proclamation, which here tomorrow will finally end British jurisdiction over Canada's Constitution.
And then she'll try the pen. If it doesn't work, then the alternate is there.
The pen will likely work, and tonight the Queen, who will use it, attended a gala concert at the National Arts Centre for the kind of show Ottawa loves putting on for world leaders. Her Majesty appeared to enjoy the show, though one number, Meet the Navy, was a perhaps tactless reminder of the crisis facing her British Navy and her son Andrew. Following the performance, the Queen and Prince Philip left for their last function in a fairly crowded day to dine with a selected group of young achievers. However blasé Ottawa may have become about visitors in recent years, there is about this trip a mounting sense of historic occasion, particularly here on Parliament Hill, where within hours the Royal Proclamation will be signed, severing forever Canada's new Constitution from British jurisdiction. This site has so often been in the front line of past battles over the Constitution that people here now can scarcely believe the final eve of patriation is here now. Brian Stewart, CBC News, Ottawa.
But while they celebrated tonight in Ottawa, across the river in Hull, Quebec, there was an angry mood. It was the first of a series of weekend demonstrations called by the Parti Québécois to protest against the Constitution. Jason Moskovitz reports.
While Ottawa glittered and buzzed with royalty in town, there was a reminder on the Quebec side of the Ottawa River that all is not well. René Lévesque's party organized the protest, except René Lévesque wasn't there. The vice premier of Quebec went instead. Lévesque couldn't afford to be embarrassed by a small turnout, and tonight's numbers were small for the occasion. No more than 600 people showed up, not very many people, not with the constitutional ceremony just hours away. But if the PQ had trouble getting people out tonight, it could be the party put all its energy in organizing another demonstration in Montreal tomorrow. René Lévesque will be at that one, and because he will, it's expected to be a big one. And while the number of demonstrators matter tonight, as the numbers will matter tomorrow, there are always those who are never counted. They don't march, but they share the thoughts of those who do. Jason Moskowitz, CBC News, Hull, Quebec.
Still ahead on the National.
I'm Joe Schlesinger in Buenos Aires. There may be a breakthrough in the Falklands crisis.
This is Jerry Thompson in Vancouver. One day before the Constitution, an Indian band has gone to court with a massive land claim.
This is David Holton in Ottawa with a report on how the new Charter of Rights may change our lives.
It looks as if there just might be a breakthrough in the Falkland Islands crisis. American Secretary of State Alexander Haig apparently made some progress today in his talks with the Argentine government. No details have been confirmed, but it's believed there's a new plan in the works for heading off a war. Joe Schlesinger reports.
When Haig arrived late last night, the atmosphere here was cool. The Argentine Foreign Minister, Nicanor Costa Mendes, was at the airport to greet him, but he had let it be known beforehand that Argentina had only invited Haig because the White House had insisted. But by the time the Secretary of State set out for talks this morning, the mood had changed. The reason, a telephone call last night by Argentine President Leopoldo Galtieri to President Reagan. General Galtieri was reported to have told Reagan that he was still determined to push for a peaceful solution. At the Foreign Ministry, an expectant crowd as Haig met with Costa Mendes. The Argentinians sweetened their previous best offer with economic concessions to the British, both in the Falklands and in the Antarctic. By afternoon, glowing headlines. Resolution is near, says this one, and government ministers backed it up with optimistic statements. But still, the war preparations went on, and Argentine warships, which had stayed in port ever since the start of the British blockade on Monday, headed for the open sea. Haig was off for more talks, amid reports that General Galtieri had called a meeting for tomorrow of the men who run this country, its generals. It's by no means over yet. For one thing, the British still have to be heard from. But this time, the Argentinians seem determined not to let Alexander Haig leave empty-handed. Joe Schlesinger, CBC News, Buenos Aires.
3 British journalists have been arrested for spying in Argentina. They were jailed after taking photographs at a restricted military base. The 3 had been missing for 5 days. An opinion poll shows most Britons are solidly behind Prime Minister Margaret Thatcher's decision to send in the fleet. But they approve of it only as a scare tactic. They don't want an actual battle. David Bazet reports.
The latest poll shows that more than 80% of the people here firmly support Prime Minister Thatcher's decision to send the Royal Navy to the Falkland Islands. There's an evident desire for revenge, reinforced by humiliating images of British Marines with their faces pushed into the mud by a military dictatorship. But support for the government here shrinks significantly when it comes to the use of force. In fact, today's poll indicates that clearly half of the Britons don't think sovereignty over the Falklands is important enough to justify the loss of British lives. And the possible loss of life is exactly what concerns Falklanders like John and Veronica Fowler, who wrote this letter to their parents.
While it is heartening to hear of Britain's present efforts, none of us here want fighting and killing on our doorstep while our children are still here. Most people desperately want to be evacuated before a counter-invasion.
One conclusion that can be drawn from today's poll is that while Britons want their government to restore national pride, they want to get the job done without spilling any British blood over the Falkland Islands. In effect, they're in favor of gunboat diplomacy so long as the guns are kept silent. David Bazet, CBC News, London.
There was a brutal double murder in Beirut today. A French diplomat and his pregnant wife were killed. Assassins entered the couple's apartment and shot them repeatedly in the head. The killers are believed to have posed as delivery men bringing flowers for a dinner party. Israeli troops have killed 2 more Arab teenagers during riots in the occupied Gaza Strip. 16 other Arabs were wounded in violence which has intensified after last Sunday's shooting at a mosque in Jerusalem. In Poland, thousands of people are still detained under martial law. The regime has tried to picture the internment camps as being similar to holiday resorts. but reports reaching the West contrast sharply with official accounts. David Andelman of CBS News reports.
Life in Warsaw's Białowieża prison is somber. Grim, endless days passed slowly in crowded cells. These are the prisoners who once were the powers behind Poland's Solidarity labor movement. Once their word was gospel to millions. Today, their audience is smaller. Even these simple pictures, snapped furtively with a miniature camera, had to be smuggled to the outside world by the Nova underground publishing house. Polish officials say 3,000 are behind the barbed wire and iron bars in prisons like Białowieża. Solidarity says perhaps thousands more are there. For some, there are beatings and worse, according to statements smuggled from inside. But for most, the day is one of endless boredom, relieved only by exercises in the prison yard, a game of cards. Far from wives and children, affection is a cat and the company of friends crowded together 3 to a cell. They live, they say, for the future, plotting and planning, writing on smuggled paper for the crudely printed Solidarity newspapers that are in turn smuggled back into the prison, passed from hand to hand. Outside, their women wait. Women like Danuta Walesa, wife of Lech Walesa, whose family of 7 children have become a symbol for thousands of other nameless families. Said Danuta in this rare interview in Polish 2 days ago, her husband is still in custody, the location hidden from the Polish people. Why? So that crowds will not come to try to free him. David Andelman, CBS News, Paris.
Coming up on The Journal.
A feature interview with Prime Minister Trudeau.
Darn it all, the country may be big, but this generation is going to hold it all together.
Prime Minister Trudeau, tonight on The Journal.
In Montreal, there was a near tragedy last night high above the swollen St. Lawrence River. A man threatened to throw a young child off the Jacques Cartier Bridge. Jim Sundstrom reports.
It was about 7:30 last night when a man holding a small boy was noticed at the top of the Jacques Cartier Bridge. He can be seen in the center of the screen, dangling the boy dangerously over the side. Police and firemen were called, the bridge was closed, and safety nets were held out to catch the boy if he was dropped. Several policemen and firemen made the dangerous climb up the bridge. They spent over an hour talking with the man and convinced him to release the boy. He was carefully carried to safety by fireman Jean-Guy Gaudreau.
I was thinking to my kids in my home, and I said, I'm saving a life like my kids, you know? And I was crying because I was so happy.
The man, thought to be the boy's father, refused to come down, and several policemen risked falling by wrestling with him. He was finally overcome and put in a straitjacket